Hello, I'm Erica Lutz with Education USA, and we're here today with Johanna Fishbein, a guidance counselor from the International School of Brussels. We're here to talk about the undergraduate U.S. admissions process. Thank you so much for being here today, Johanna.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So I understand that you were an admissions representative from Barnard College in New York City for several years.
Yes.
And I'm delighted to have you here to talk a little bit about what it's like to be working through the U.S. admissions process as an international student. Could you tell us a little bit about what it's like to go through the admissions file as you are looking at it from a U.S. admissions representative side?
Sure. Well, I always tell our students, I think the best thing about the U.S. admissions process is when they say holistic review, they really do mean a holistic review. So for a lot of schools, it's not just test scores and it's not just one thing, but they're looking at lots of different things. So when I used to read an admissions file, we would first actually look at extracurriculars and see, like, what does this student like to do when they're outside of the classroom? What are they passionate about? Which is why we always say students start doing things in 9th or 10th grade, and like long-term involvement is good. You can do just one thing and do it for long periods of time. So for example, we have some students who did dance, but you dance 40 hours a week. That's a long-term commitment. We don't expect that you've done lots of other things. So we looked at extracurriculars, then we would look at their essay and their supplement. Interest in a college or a university is the most important thing, or besides grades. And so I think a student showing that this school is where they really want to be and recognizing what about that school makes it a place they want to apply is very important.
What are things that students can do to show their interest in a school?
Do your research. Don't state things that are on the website. Don't state things incorrectly. Barnard was a college, not a university, and we would always laugh when a student wrote, and I'm applying to Barnard University. No, it's a college. So just making sure that you've done your research and that you can speak to what you're going to bring. What is the student going to bring to the campus, and what are they going to take advantage of on the campus? And really talking about why the school is a good fit for the student and why the student's a good fit for the school. And that's why those supplements are so important, I think.
And you mentioned supplement, so I assume that you're talking about in the common application process you have a general essay, and then students are often asked to do a supplement. So the supplement is something tailored to each school, and each school has a different question of the supplement?
Correct. So because the common application you can now apply to 400 schools, most schools also have a supplement, which is where they want to see why are you applying to us instead of the other 399 schools. And so that's why it's very important. Some schools it's a short answer question, some it's 4 short answer questions, some it's just 1 extra essay.
Can you think of an example of a supplemental statement that a student might have to tailor their question to?
So Yale, or Barnard used to ask, Anna Quinlan is an alum of Barnard. She said she majored in Unafraid. What does that statement mean to you? So it's getting at things like leadership. Why do you want to be at a women's college? Things like that. I know there used to be a school, I want to say it was Brandeis, that said, would you want to live in a world run by robots or dinosaurs? So that's very creative thinking and looking at that. Yale asks, what is the nicest thing anyone ever said about you, or talk about a compliment. So things like that. If I'm misquoting those questions, I'm sorry, but it's those types of things that are very helpful to get why students interested.
That's really interesting because, of course, we're working a lot with international students who might not have had the extracurricular experience as you were aforementioning. In other words, a student is, let's say, in Europe, largely perceived as only a student, so should only be focused on their schoolwork. What would you tell a student then that hasn't, by the time they're maybe close to graduating, who hasn't had a significant amount of leadership experience? What is something that they could do to improve their application?
Well, I think just explaining and giving the context of where they're coming from. So there's also an additional information section on the Common Application, and I always recommend a student feel comfortable filling in that section and talking a little bit about their background. So if you're at a lycée, chances are you're at school till 6 or 7 at night, you're not going to have extracurriculars and they're not part of the curriculum, and just tell the admissions counselor that. If it's not a common application school, you can always email the admissions counselor too, and I encourage students to do that, and that's kind of a US thing. Some schools in Europe, and you don't really email them, but in the US you can, and there's usually a person you can find on the website who you can always just say, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm from the International School of Brussels, I want to tell you a little more about myself, and that will go right in with your file.
So that would be another way of showing interest to the school as well. Does a school keep all types of correspondence on record, generally speaking? So in other words, if you have student Y who's applying and all of a sudden you're reading his application, can you bring up emails and so on that the student has sent you? Is that something that might be of interest?
Some schools do, and some don't, but regardless, if you've emailed that person, they're going to recognize your name when your file comes up, and they'll think, oh, I remember seeing some emails from that student, they must be interested. So I think it can't hurt either way.
Very good. And are there things that you would say, so you receive an application, maybe we can just go through the process. So you have a file in front of you. The first thing you see on the top is the actual Common Application file. Beneath it are the transcripts. Just tell us what it is that kind of comes into a package that you receive.
So we get a file, and it has on the first part, the front page of the Common Application, we see your demographic information, see where you're from, see your citizenship. Citizenship can determine financial aid, things like that. So we look at that first. And usually the most important thing about that front page is to just make sure the right person is reading your file. So the person in charge of Europe would read files from the International School of Brussels. Then we look at extracurriculars, which you list on the Common Application, then the essay, then the supplement, then your transcript. So when they look at your transcript, and it's not always read in this order, but often when they look at your transcript, they'll have seen your extracurriculars and your essay and supplements, so they can look at you in context. So look at transcript, they're looking for a rigorous program, whether it's IB, AP, whether it's just honors classes, lycée courses. Then they're going to look at your guidance counselor recommendations, so make sure you know your guidance counselor. For students at local schools, they might not have a guidance counselor, so it should be a dean or a head or a principal, someone who is not a teacher who can speak to the whole class. That's the purpose of the guidance counselor recommendation, is to talk about the student in the context of their graduating class. And they're the ones who give background on the school. So they might say, we are a lycée, we don't have extracurriculars, our students don't have access. And then, oh, we know that, it's good. And then teacher recommendations, usually schools like to see 2 of them. I recommend usually a teacher you've had in the last 2 years, just to be more current. And then they're going to look at testing. Some schools require SAT, ACT testing, some don't. Students have to do their research. Some require subject tests. Some, if you take the ACT, you don't need a subject test, so it's just important to look at the websites. And then they're going to look at any supplemental information. So some schools have optional interviews. If something's optional, do it. So if there's an interview available, I always recommend it. It usually helps and it seldom hurts. But again, make sure you've done your research first. And then if a student's really involved in art, sometimes they send samples of their work. If they're applying for music, they might send in a sample of their music, things like that. And then they review it all together, and that's what holistic means, is that they're not making a decision until they've seen everything about you.
Some students ask me if I'm going to be taking the ACT or the SAT or the TOEFL or the IELTS, and I'm not 100% sure I'm going to that school, or let's say they're going to send it to Barnard, but they're not 100% sure they're going. Let's say you do receive the score. Does the school then just file it away somewhere and wait and see if you actually send in your full application?
Yes. A school usually won't consider you an applicant until they've seen your common application or the actual application portion. So we used to have a whole bin of just loose credentials, which were things people had sent in, but they didn't actually end up applying. But we just filed them away.
And of course the reverse can happen, which is that you do apply and they're still waiting for that SAT score to come in, that ACT score to come in. They're waiting for that professor to send in their letter of recommendation. What do you do in that kind of a situation?
So the student needs to track, most schools you can track your application and you can see what's in or not. Almost all schools will contact you if they're missing something. So we used to contact students. We would never penalize them if we didn't have a teacher recommendation. We would just say, can you send us another copy? So students should make copies of everything in their application. Even if you're submitting it electronically, it's always a good idea because you never know where things are going to go. But it's just important to keep an eye on things, and you can always, again, feel free to email the admissions office or call them.
And on the same note, if they had extra information that they would like to say, or for some reason their transcript didn't upload properly into the Common App, whatever it may be that they were trying to upload, I should say, is it okay that they go ahead and send a printout version and send it directly to the admissions office?
It depends on the school. They should email that admissions representative for their area. Some schools will accept an emailed copy. Some are going to want it actually mailed from the school with a signature on the envelope. So it just depends.
And for letters of recommendation, if you have a student who asks, I have 17 people who will recommend me. If you were admissions representative and you saw 17 letters of recommendation, how would you feel about that?
It's about quality versus quantity, so pick the 3 or pick the 2 who are going to really add to your application, not the ones who are just going to say the same thing over and over again.
And let's say someone has a friend whose father is the king of a particular country. Is that a good person to have a letter of recommendation from, even if the student doesn't know them personally?
No, it's only helpful if they know you and if the person can really speak to what you're going to bring to that university.
And so let's talk a bit about letters of recommendation. Are there things that you like to see as you're reading through an application file? I'm sure you saw things like Erica is a wonderful student. She came to class on time every day. She was a delight to have in the classroom. Are those helpful things, or are there things that you're really looking to see?
So we just did a training at ISB for our teachers on what should be in a letter of recommendation, and the thing we said was anecdotes and be specific, because teachers tend to put a lot of adjectives in their letters of recommendation, which is great, but they tend to be the same. And so anything teachers can write that really makes that student stand out, so talking about a specific project they did, talking about how they actually learned, talking about how they added to the classroom, just being specific is the most important thing. Also, schools read by country sometimes, so for example, I may have read all the recommendations from ISB at once, and sometimes you would see the same one a teacher wrote for more than one student. And it's not to the detriment of the student, but it's not going to help them because you automatically think, well, that letter is not personal. And so it's important, I think, just to keep it specific. And it doesn't need to be long, it just needs to be specific.
So a 4-page letter filled with just adjectives versus 1-page letter filled with lots of anecdotes. The 1 page might win over that.
Sometimes a 3-paragraph letter is great. It just needs to be just showing that you really know the student, and really talking to their fit within a certain university can be really helpful.
So letters of recommendation, of course, we have the international issues of some professors outside of the United States being a little bit more modest and subdued than American professors. Of course, admissions folks know that.
Yes, they do. And they'll be used to seeing from certain countries, you don't see specific letters. And then you look at other things. So that's when you hope the guidance counselor can really speak more to the student. And that's when we might encourage students to send in more supplemental recommendations. For example, if they play on a football team or something like that, other people who can speak to their personal characteristics if they don't feel it was conveyed in their teacher recommendations.
So you have transcripts, which of course are, I'm guessing, significantly the most important because they're your academics, the bedrock of your application. You have letters of recommendation, which are other people talking about you as an applicant. But then, of course, there's the one place where you really have to showcase yourself with your own voice, and that's the essay/personal statement.
Yes.
Are there things that you could talk to us about that students should do or not do, perhaps, in the personal essay or statement?
Sure. I always say it's the most important part. The most important thing to remember is that essay should be about you. It's a personal statement. So if you're answering the question that asks for who was someone who was influential in your life, you can talk about your mother and how she influenced you, but make sure it's about you, because we used to say we always would be left wanting to admit the mother and wouldn't know anything about the student. So doing that, you want to proofread it. I think the most important thing is to answer the question, or if you're doing a topic of your choice, then keep it focused. I think broad is usually dangerous. I think, again, more specific and focused tend to be better. Now it's usually around 400 words, so keep it to that. And just make sure that if you're funny, be funny, but if you're not funny, don't be funny. You want it to really convey who you are. And don't make silly spelling errors. Have at least 2 people read it, one who doesn't love you, all the usual things. Just really making sure it is your best work. And the supplement is the same. It deserves just as much attention as that essay. And I think often students think, oh, it's short answer, I don't need to pay attention to it. But it needs just as much proofreading, rewriting. I have students writing 10 drafts of their personal statements. That's good. It should be going back and forth, and it should be your best work.
I have students that say, well, I never had anything dramatic happen to me. I never saved the lives of 10 people from a burning building. Are those the types of things that need to be so sensational in an essay, or could it be something so simple?
No, the simple ones are usually really good. My favorite essay I ever read when I was an admissions counselor was about a girl who wrote how her whole family had skinny legs and all the places those skinny legs had taken them. And it was such a simple idea, but it was beautifully executed, and you really felt, oh my gosh, I know who this student is. And so I think those are the most powerful essays.
Because that's the idea, right, is that you have their transcripts, you know their grades, you know what courses they took, you know what extracurricular activities they did, you know if they were a leader or not, but you don't actually know the actual student until you start reading those letters of recommendation
right.
and the essays to get a sense and a feeling of what the student is like. Is that right?
Exactly. And a lot of times they're going to read your essay and supplement before they even look at your grades or your recommendations. So that's where you can really introduce yourself to the admissions counselor. So we don't want students to feel too much pressure about it, but that is the most important part besides your grades. So that's where you can really say, pay attention to me, and look, and students should use it to do that.
At least it's the most important thing that they can change their last year, their senior year, in order to change something on their application. Can you just explain what a committee is? I know that briefly you had mentioned something about how a committee would read your application or going into a committee. What does that mean from a U.S. admissions perspective?
So a lot of colleges and universities in the U.S. have a committee review process, which means your admissions decision is not determined by one person, but it's determined by a committee. So maybe it's 5 people, maybe it's 8 people, maybe it's the whole admissions office, and they meet and sit around a table and they talk about you. So some applicants they talk about for 5 minutes, some they talk about for 45 minutes. And that's why when you're writing your essay, we always say don't be controversial, because you never know who's going to be reading it or what perspectives are in that room. If there are 10 people, those are 10 very different points of view. But the great thing is that one person might think, oh, this student, I'm not so interested, and the other 9 people might think this student's amazing, and then the student's going to get in. So it just means you have lots of different people debating a decision, and it's not black and white. There are a lot of different thoughts coming into the process. And so there's never one person to blame, and there's never one person to thank. It really is usually the whole school making a decision.
That's great. I think we're coming to the end here of our interview. I just had a few last short questions, if you wouldn't mind. Often students will ask me, how long does it take someone to read over an application? I'm sure there's not one particular answer, but is there something that you could give guidance to? Are they looking over your application for 3 days nonstop? Are they looking at it for 2 minutes?
No, it used to be around 10 to 15 minutes. But then we would go back, and a lot of times they do read by school group, so then you might go back and compare other students from the same school group.
And I know since you were a representative from Barnard College that you were working for an all-women's college. Could you say a word about an all-women's college and what that means?
Sure. So women's colleges are something that I think are unique. It's a place where I think there's a huge focus on leadership and really pushing a woman to be the best she can be professionally, academically, socially. There's a big misnomer or I think misconception that women's colleges are just a bunch of feminists going around like, and that's not what it is at all. It's more of a community, and it's just a really strong community. And socially it's very co-ed, and you know, they have tons of extracurriculars to get involved in, but it's just that at this school, even though there may be men in your classes, the curriculum was designed for a woman, and you're going to see more strong women to kind of follow and mentor you. And I will say that I used to always be able to tell who was a Columbia student and who was a Barnard student, because the Barnard women are so confident. And it's just, there's no telling them no. They're just like, of course I can do that. Why couldn't I? And so I think women's colleges can often be a great fit for the right type of student.
Super. Well, thank you so much for all your valuable information. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today, and thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And we'll see you next time on Education USA TV. Thanks a lot.